All right, Belinda, we were just having a conversation offline about part-time work. And one of the things I'm curious about is, from your perspective, what are some of the pitfalls for us to watch out for when we're thinking about part-time?
Great question. There's quite a few, as anyone who's worked part-time will know. And I would say the biggest pitfall or the biggest watch out is around role scoping or role sizing and making sure that if you take on a part-time role, you and your manager do the work to reduce the size and scope of the role so it's in line with the time you have available and in line with what you're being paid for. And interestingly, it sounds so obvious now that I've said it, but a lot of people don't even think about this. So a few years ago, when I was writing my book on this topic, I interviewed a senior leader working at a not-profit organization. Her name was Catherine. And she said that when she went from 5 days a week to 3 days a week, she went into her boss and said, all right, let's talk about, who was the CEO, said, let's talk about what we take off my plate and reallocate elsewhere. And he was just totally surprised at the question, the idea. He was like, why would we be doing that? So, yeah, so
Hmm.
that's one of the really big ones, I would say, the role scoping piece. How about you? What do you see?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, right? And I think there's also compounded when one of the things I've been talking to a few people about who are, again, similar kind of senior leaders part-time is this performative day off, where
Mm,
they're away from the workplace and whatever, form that looks like, but actually they're they've got some emails going backwards and forwards. They've got, they might take the odd phone call or text message, or they'll be catching up quietly from home, like
yeah.
on their day off. And it's that kind of beware of, yes, the role scope and also your own boundaries,
Mm,
because both of those things have got to live together. And I think if we haven't got the role scope right, and also we haven't got understood boundaries that are respected by ourselves as well as others, it's kind of a disaster waiting to happen, isn't it? The
absolutely. And I
worst of
really
all
like
worlds.
Yeah, exactly. Worst of all worlds. Not
Yeah.
getting paid for the work, but still doing it. And then the bias that can creep in around working part-time. So absolutely. And I really like this framework or dichotomy that you've set up in a recent newsletter you wrote around performative part-time versus powerful part-time. And I do really think what you said is true around no amount of boundaries can help if you're still trying to do a full-time role in 3 days a week. Equally, you can scope your role really well, but do a poor job of setting your boundaries because it's hard and still end up working the 5 days no matter how good the role scope is. So they do need to go hand in
Yeah,
hand.
they do. They do. I remember when I was working I mean, only just part-time, in a senior role I had. And it took me, I think, about 6 to 8 weeks to train everybody else around me that I really meant
Mm,
it, that I was going to have Fridays off, like,
yeah.
and so I think even if you have scoped the role and you do set your boundaries, that education piece can feel quite exhausting, particularly in the first few, when you're trying to defend some of those boundaries. Um, and then it gets easier. I think that was my experience anyway, and I think that's the experience of other people. But it's just hard work, and I think the more people understand that those two things really need to be done well, the scoping and the boundary setting, and everybody honors both, rather
Mm,
than it's up to the individual to drive the role scope, like your example, and it's up to the
mm,
individual to defend their boundaries.
yeah.
It can become a lot of additional work for people that are trying to work part-time. And at first, it can feel quite impossible.
It can. And manager support, of course, makes a big difference in terms of helping set those expectations with the rest of the team and your colleagues. But I think what trips people up a lot with boundary setting is they feel like people might think poorly of them if they set boundaries or think they're less committed or things like that. And what I'll often advise people is that there is a way to set boundaries that's collaborative and actually builds trust and relationships rather than erodes it. And if you do it well and deliver what you say you're going to deliver in the hours that you're supposed to be working, people will absolutely respect that and respect it more than seeing you work full time on your day off. So,
Yeah,
mm,
yeah, exactly. And I think you're right, respecting those boundaries and being collaborative. And I think having something, that energizes you that you're doing that's away from work on that time out, I found that's quite helpful because then you haven't got, well, you limit the option for you to kind of do this performative day off, right? You know, kind of mine was years ago when my kids were little and I used to go to playgroup on a Friday morning.
Mm,
It's like, well, can't exactly be working from playgroup, you know, like
yeah.
when I'm surrounded by babies and toddlers. So I think setting yourself up so that those boundaries, you can stick to them yourself if you've committed to something else that matters to you, I think can make life a bit easier, whatever that is.
Absolutely. And if you think about people who currently might recognize in themselves this performative part time or in the way they're currently working in their part time roles, do you think it's too late to get rid of that performative part time day and do something different?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. I don't think it is too late. I think it's never too late. It's easier to start as you mean to go on, for sure. So if you're going into a new role, definitely kind of take the time and energy to set it up in the right way if you can. But if you need a reset, I think people respond well. I'm working with a whole team at the moment who are looking at a shorter work week. And so they're all resetting boundaries and they're all trying to find ways to reduce their hours. And the collaborative nature of that exercise is really heartening to see people talk more openly about, I find this really hard, and this is what I need from you to support me to get better at it. And I
Mm.
think it's lovely to see people having that openness and disclosure so that they can reset. And people, on the whole, want to support and play their part.